West Coast, 3 o'clock on Capitol Hill, where lawmakers are trying to keep the government from shutting down again. And senators say they have an agreement. But then there's the House. The top Democrat in the House of Representatives says there is no deal without a promise to protect the Dreamers. So what to do? Plus the memos. Days after a Republican document blasted the Russia investigation, the Democrats are trying to give their side, they say. Now President Trump is talking to his staffers and deciding whether to let the Democratic version go public. And nations like Russia, France, and North Korea hold regular military parades. Washington hasn't seen one since like '91. But President Trump says it's time to roll out the tanks. I want a parade. Let's get to it.
Now, Shepard Smith reporting live from the Fox News deck.
And good Wednesday afternoon from the deck. Senate leaders say they now have a deal to prevent another government showdown tomorrow night. But the top Democrat in the House of Representatives is threatening to derail it. Nancy Pelosi has been speaking nonstop on the House floor for the past 5 hours. The House Minority Leader says that Democrats will not approve a spending bill unless the Republican House Speaker, Paul Ryan, promises a vote to protect the Dreamers. They are, of course, the hundreds of thousands of immigrants whose parents brought them to the U.S. as children without documents.
Unless we can get the same commitment that Mitch McConnell gave the bipartisan group of legislators who asked for it in the Senate, we would like that same response to our bipartisan group.
A spokesperson for Speaker Ryan responded saying, Speaker Ryan has already repeatedly stated we intend to do a DACA and immigration reform bill, one that the president supports. DACA is the program that protects the Dreamers. President Trump has said that he will end it next month unless Congress extends it or comes up with a replacement. The White House says it applauds this Senate plan to deal with immigration outside of the spending bill. Just yesterday, the president said he'd love a shutdown if lawmakers don't close what he calls immigration loopholes. The White House said later in the day it was not advocating a shutdown, but you can see where we are now. We have Team Fox coverage. The chief White House correspondent, John Roberts, is live at the White House. First, our chief congressional correspondent, Mike Emanuel, is live on the Hill. What do we know about the deal in the Senate?
Well, Shep, here's what our sources say is in this spending agreement: about $165 billion more for the United States military, about $131 billion more for domestic priorities. It would increase the debt ceiling, the government's ability to borrow money through March 2019, and disaster relief funding for hurricane and wildfire victims. The Senate Majority Leader talked about the benefit to the United States military.
First and foremost, this bipartisan agreement will unwind the sequestration cuts that have hamstrung our armed forces and jeopardized our national security.
The Senate Democratic leader talked about some of the domestic priorities, getting some more money in this deal, and noted it is a compromise.
There are one or two final details to work out, but all the principles of the agreement are in place. The budget deal doesn't have everything Democrats want. It doesn't have everything Republicans want, but it has a great deal of what the American people want.
And if it's passed, it would keep the government open for 6 weeks, so those folks who dole out the money to different government programs could work on a funding agreement to shell out the cash. Shep?
It's a compromise. Nancy Pelosi has been speaking since like 10 o'clock this morning here on the East Coast without any breaks. Where's she going?
Well, Republican sources note that Nancy Pelosi was a part of these talks with Leader McConnell, Leader Schumer, and also House Speaker Paul Ryan. But clearly she is worried that her base is agitated about immigration reform, worried about the DACA Dreamers. And so she's on the floor arguing that she wants an agreement or a promise from House Speaker Paul Ryan that will be happening in short order. Take a listen to her.
This morning we took a measure of our caucus because the package really does nothing to advance a bipartisan legislation to protect Dreamers in the House. Without a commitment from Speaker Ryan comparable to the commitment from Leader McConnell, this package cannot have my support.
What she's making reference to is Leader McConnell has said after they get this funding stuff off the table that they will take up immigration reform next on the Senate floor. She wants a similar assurance from the House Speaker. Ryan's spokesperson says he's willing to do it, but he wants to make sure they're taking up a bill that President Trump is willing to sign. Democrat votes will be needed in the House, and so this is certainly something to watch. Shep?
Mike Emanuel, thanks. Of course, the White House praising this Senate budget deal, saying it includes a much-needed increase in defense spending. That was their ace in the hole today. Team Fox coverage continues. The chief White House correspondent John Roberts live on the North Lawn. Hi, John.
Shep, good afternoon to you. The White House says that it likes what it sees so far. What's coming out of the Senate, they do need to see what the final version of the bill is going to be, though, and then, of course, what happens in the House. But Sarah Huckabee Sanders this afternoon saying that this ends the yearly crisis, actually kind of a monthly crisis, in funding and does provide money for the military. But you talked to Mike about this, and Mike showed that Nancy Pelosi has been on the floor of the House for hours arguing that a deal for the so-called Dreamers needs to be included in any type of two-year budget deal, prompting this sharp reaction from Sarah Sanders this afternoon. Listen here.
I think we've made clear that the budget deal should be a budget deal, and that members of Congress, like Nancy Pelosi, should not hold our military hostage over a separate issue. We've laid out what we would like to see in immigration legislation, and I think it's something that Nancy Pelosi should support, and hopefully she will come on board.
Now, if the Democrats were to get their wish and, hold a budget deal until there is a deal on DACA in place, we may be waiting an awfully long time, Shep, because I'm told that while there's an agreement in the Senate, while there's an agreement in the House on a temporary spending measure, they're nowhere close even to forging a deal on DACA. So, there's still a lot of differences that they can't seem to get past. Democrats insisting that they do a one-for-one protection for the Dreamers for border security and then leave the chain migration and the vetting process for a later date, which Republicans fear would be never. So they're at an impasse on that front, Shep.
You asked about the Democratic memo on the Russia investigation.
I did, and Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that it continues to go through the vetting process, though, and didn't say much more about it than that. But we're learning from Republican sources and sources here at the White House that there's more to this memo than there was in the GOP memo, and that speaks specifically to the idea that there's information in here that goes to sources and methods that would likely either have to be redacted, or if not redacted, the president may have to object to its declassification altogether. The chief of staff, John Kelly, saying yesterday that this memo is not as clean as the memo that the Republicans delivered to the White House a week ago. And now that has raised suspicions among people here at the White House and many Republicans that the Democratic minority in the House Intelligence Committee is trying to force the White House into making changes to its memo when the White House made no changes to the Republican memo. Listen to Trey Gowdy here and then the Deputy Press Secretary Hogan Gidley from the White House.
The Democrats are politically smart enough to put things in the memo that require either the Bureau or the Department of Justice to say it needs to be redacted. Therefore, it creates this belief that there's something being hidden from the American people.
The Democrats are playing politics with people's lives here, and that they tried to load in sources and methods so that we'd have to redact it so that they could claim some type of political bias against them.
The Democrats on Capitol Hill are insisting that this memo should be released and that if the White House makes any type of political redactions to it, they said that would be nothing more than White House stonewalling on this issue. Shep?
And then there was this other matter, John, the senior White House official who says he's leaving but denying the accusations that he physically abused two of his ex-wives.
Yeah, all of this has unfolded in the last few days in the UK publication, the Daily Mail. Rob Porter is the staff secretary. He is a key player. He really coordinates policy in the White House. He's also responsible for vetting all of the information that makes it to the president's desk. Also reported to be dating the communications director here at the White House, Hope Hicks. His two ex-wives claim that he verbally and physically abused them. His first wife claims that he punched her in the face, giving her a black eye while they were on vacation in Italy. The White House staff huddled this morning to discuss these allegations and what to do about it. Early this afternoon, Porter resigned his position and put out a statement that was read by the press secretary. Listen here.
Rob has put out a statement, which I can read to you now, and I think it will address some of those other questions. These outrageous allegations are simply false. I took the photos given to the media nearly 15 years ago, and the reality behind them is nowhere close to what is being described. I've been transparent and truthful about these vile claims, but I will not further engage publicly with a coordinated smear campaign. My commitment to public service speaks for itself. I've always put duty to country first and treated others with respect. I am deeply grateful for the opportunity to have served in the Trump administration and will seek to ensure a smooth transition when I leave the White House.
Those photographs that Sarah Sanders referred to in the statement were photographs of his first wife with a black eye. Her right eye was blackened during that vacation to Italy. Shep, the Daily Mail says that this is known by the FBI, everything that went on, that as part of a security clearance, the FBI interviewed his two ex-wives, and apparently they told their stories. So, there's still some thread to pull on in this. We haven't heard Rob Porter's side of the story. So we don't know exactly how he would explain what we've learned about in the last couple of days, but certainly the FBI knows all about it. Not to say that they're going to be saying anything about it, but there's a lot more that we need to learn about this, Shep.
John Roberts at the White House. John, thanks very much.
Thank you.
More ahead on the budget deal and this push to get this through the House of Representatives. Did you see what happened today? The Defense Secretary speaking at the White House, saying our military needs this. That's a heck of a push on anybody to say no over on the Democratic side in the House of Representatives, isn't it? It makes it extremely difficult. Might they get this done over Nancy Pelosi's objections? Certainly possible. I'll speak next on all of this, coming up from the Fox News Desk. Reading away. Nancy Pelosi is reading away there. What's she saying?
Fort William and people like him who want to stay here and serve in the armed forces. I think the answer is quite clear.
It's getting harder and harder to continue to speak, as she's been doing so since 10 a.m. here on the East Coast time. The California Congresswoman says she will not support a deal to prevent the government from shutting down tomorrow night unless the House Speaker Paul Ryan guarantees a vote on the Dreamers. A spokeswoman for the Speaker says he's already said he intends to vote on an immigration bill. Let's bring in Joseph Williams now. He's a reporter for the newspaper and website Roll Call. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
There's an interesting setup now, because we heard yesterday from the president, I'm okay with a shutdown. Now they have this deal, a bipartisan deal, and Nancy Pelosi's like, no way. That means Nancy Pelosi gets blamed for the shutdown, right? And that's not a great place to be.
Yeah, there's a lot of optimism in the Senate on this deal, and in the House, you're seeing a bit of the opposite. You're seeing conservatives backlash against it.
Yeah, we'll get to them. I want to talk about Nancy Pelosi first, because her point is, look, I've promised my constituents, Democrats have promised, we will come up with a way for the Dreamers, and this is about the end of our juice. This is about the end of our leverage. We got to get this for the Dreamers. So all of a sudden they bring in the military. They didn't just bring in the military. They brought the top man from the military to the White House to speak from the podium there. You never see that. Presidents go to the Pentagon, but secretaries of defense rarely come to the White House. The pressure is heavy, isn't it?
It is, and you've seen the same pressure exerted on Democrats on the past CRs, the same that they said they were blocking funding for the military. So it remains to be seen how many Democrats go along with Nancy Pelosi and vote against this. As you've said, Speaker Paul Ryan has already made clear what his plans are for the DACA debate, and there's not a lot of optimism that those plans would change. So it's now Nancy Pelosi versus the rest of her Democratic caucus to see if there'll be enough votes to join with Republicans and pass this.
And those on the far right, the conservatives, the Freedom Caucus, that bunch has different concerns, right?
They do. They're upset about the debt limit being attached to this. They're upset about the increases to non-defense spending.
They think we spend too much already and spending's going way up.
Yes. And so you'll see, possibly upwards of a third of the House Republican conference voting against this spending cap seal on the 6-week CR.
Well, it sounds like if you add all those C's and R's and seals and things together, in the House of Representatives, it doesn't look like at this moment there are enough votes to pass this, or it looks like there are.
There could. Again, it depends on how many Democrats choose to break from Nancy Pelosi's position that they will not support this without a more firm deal on DACA. And what we're hearing is there could be a number that does decide to break away and does support this. Again, until I think it gets over to the House. I think the understanding is Paul Ryan has made a commitment, and they're not exactly sure how much more you would be willing to extract from the Speaker. They want a similar deal that the Senate Democrats got, and it's not known if that's possible, if Speaker Ryan will make the same deal that Leader McConnell made to his conference and to the Senate Democrats.
It really was a moment a couple of hours ago. One I feel like we ought to take notice of and make mention of. A bipartisan agreement came out of Washington. You saw the leader for the Republicans in the Senate, the leader for the Democrats in the Senate, the White House all saying yes, 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 we can get this done. Bipartisanship, at least for the senior bunch. And then over there in the House, it's the same thing that we've been looking at for years now. The Freedom Caucus on one side and the liberals from the Democrats on the other side, and no compromise to be made. If they can't get this done, if they cannot get this done, where does that leave Nancy Pelosi?
That's a good question. There has been a lot of reporting done about her future in as the leader of the Democratic caucus in the House, and I think this is really a pivotal moment for her, trying to bridge the two factions in her party, those who are very hard on immigration and want to see a DACA deal done, and those maybe more moderate members who are concerned about keeping the government open, keeping funding going. So how she kind of navigates this will be very telling, and will, I think, play a really large role in how she continues to lead the caucus after this. I'm not sure how this all plays out. Again, I think we have to see where the votes are at, but this is a really telling moment for her leadership and her future as the head of the House Democratic Party.
It is. When you look at it and just say, all right, here's where they are and here's who everybody is, and I cover these people all the time and I have a pretty good idea about this, do you say it looks more like this is about to happen or more like this is going to be roadblocked?
Like I said, there's a lot of optimism, and I think, given the difficulty there was in reaching this deal already, something that Nancy Pelosi was a part of as one of the big four, I think there's a lot of hope that this will eventually pass and that the votes will be there. This could all change once the bill actually gets to the House and past the Senate. So I think there's a lot of optimism that this will all be signed, sealed, and delivered before the funding deadline Thursday at midnight.
Joseph Williams from Roll Call. Great to see you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you again for having me.
Sure, it was quite a thing, wasn't it? To look up there and see the Secretary of Defense walk up to the podium at the White House and explain, your military's been going through this with your continuing resolutions long enough. We have to plan for the future. Do you understand? We can't do this anymore. And Republicans who are, they're very pro-defense. For a Republican to say, yeah, but we're overspending, we're not going to give you what you want, that would be very hard. And for Democrats to say, we got to protect these dreamers, so we're not going to fund the military right now, that would be very hard. The optics here are powerful. Much more ahead out of D.C., plus a potential tough sign for Republicans. Democrats just flipped another seat in a deeply red district. Did you hear about this overnight? Where it happened, what Republicans and Democrats say it could mean for the midterms. Sometimes small things tell big stories, and sometimes they don't. We'll see coming up. You heard what happened last night in the state of Missouri, right? They were having some of those special elections that have been happening in different states across the country. This one for a House seat in a state that's as deep red as you can imagine. It is full-on Republican, this seat. And party officials say that one race could be a sign of a very big blue wave coming in November. 10 precincts in one district, and as it came in, it started to become clear that the Democrat was going to take this. His name is Mike Rivas. He's a centrist, just left of center, young guy, 27 years old, has a regular job. He's a regular guy. He's a manager at Anheuser-Busch in Missouri, right? He beat his, this was an open seat. He beat his challenger, the Republican David Linton, by 4 percentage points. So it was really close, right? But here's the key. President Trump won this in a landslide. When President Trump ran in this district to become president, he won by 28 percentage points. So this Democrat won by 4. It's an enormous swing, and Democrats say it means a lot. The Democratic sites and the Democratic tweeters were lighting up all night and into the day. They say it shows they are putting up the best candidates focused on local issues and that they can win in ruby red districts, that they can flip the House. That was a state House. It's important to note, Republicans won 3 other races in Missouri last night. There were 4 different special elections. Republicans won 3 of them, as they were expected to, but they were all much closer than anyone would have imagined just a year ago. They still control the supermajority in that state's House of Representatives. So don't get me wrong, Missouri is still very red. But little things are changing. Still, this comes in the wake of a few recent wins by Democrats. That includes down in Alabama, where, well, there was a lot going on in Alabama. Doug Jones became the first Democratic senator from that state in a quarter century, but as you know, there were extenuating circumstances. The Pentagon is planning a military parade after President Trump asked for one. That's the word from one U.S. defense official. The president, remember, he attended the Bastille Day parade in Paris back in July. He called it one of the greatest parades he'd ever seen. He was clearly having a great time. At times, he was smiling ear to ear. He said later how much he loved it, and he said, we're going to have to try to top that. The national security correspondent, Jennifer Griffin, is live in Washington. When did this happen? It wasn't like yesterday. This was a while ago, wasn't it?
Well, Shep, when the president visited the Pentagon on January 18th to meet with the Joint Chiefs in the tank and receive his global threat assessment, he mentioned how impressed he had been while visiting France during Bastille Day last July and seeing the military parade replete with tanks and military hardware and marching soldiers on the Champs-Élysées. On the plane ride home, he said he was dazzled by the show of military hardware and has wondered out loud repeatedly since then as to why the U.S. does not have such a military parade along Pennsylvania Avenue. The defense secretary and others realized at that Pentagon meeting in January that the president's musings were serious and ordered to start planning. Defense Secretary Mattis, was asked about it just moments ago at the White House.
We're all aware in this country of the president's affection and respect for the military. We've been putting together some options. We'll send them up to the White House.
We haven't made a final decision. The president's simply exploring different ways that he can highlight and show the pride that we have in the military.
At the inauguration, President Trump was disappointed that he could not have a full military parade with tanks and other symbols of American power to mark his ascent to the presidency. At the time, he was dissuaded, for one, because the tank treads would tear up Pennsylvania Avenue, Shep.
It's a lot more than that, isn't it? I mean, you'd have to get them in there somehow, and I guess wouldn't the light posts have to come up, and how are the bridges? I mean, there's a lot to think about, including the D.C. Council this morning that put a no tank sign up there.
Well, and there's also the fact that they will be taken out of training. It would be very costly at a time when defense budgets are a real issue. I would describe, however, the reaction at the Pentagon yesterday when this story broke as a collective eye roll from military leaders who I've spoken to. Most thought it was a joke at first. Many fear that the U.S. will look like the dictators they scoff at around the world. North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un plans a military parade through his capital tomorrow, in fact, to prop up his authoritarian regime. China and Russia have long held these kinds of military parades for years to divert attention, divert their population from criticizing their lack of freedom and good government. The tradition in France dates back to Napoleon. The U.S. did, however, once have a military parade on Pennsylvania Avenue after the first Gulf War. Then Defense Secretary Dick Cheney and General Norman Schwarzkopf reviewed the troops, but that was after the military had won a war. Bottom line, from military brass whom I've spoken to, a feeling that they have much more pressing and important issues on their plates, and planning a parade is not one of them. Shep?
He could go see the tanks at a military base if he wanted to.
Well, and they do have parades on those bases. We have video of the 82nd Airborne. They have annual events. There are parades and there are shows of military hardware all across the country.
Like an airborne one. That's a thing to see.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
It's incredible. Or they could give him replicas, little mini replicas. I mean, if he wants to see what he has, they could give him little. I had some of those when I was a kid.
Well, years ago, we did a story from Moscow on how the Russians used to put out balloons as missiles, and they were tricking the U.S., and those were fake missiles that they were parading through Red Square, so we don't want to be accused of that.
No, but you could get the little plastic ones and lay them out on the table and say, here you go. I don't know.
And we could play strategy and risk.
We could. Why not? Jennifer, have a great day. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Approaching the bottom of the hour, on the top of the news, the Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says Russian hackers are trying to interfere again with the election here in the United States. We may not be able to stop them, which is fabulous news. What this could mean for the midterm elections coming up, and it's the bottom of the hour, we'll do some headlines. Then we'll come back with a reset on America's choice for news and information on cable. This is Fox News Channel. Bottom of the hour now, on the top of the news, the Russians are already trying to interfere in this year's midterm elections right here in the United States. Who says so? The Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says so. He also says it could be very tough to stop them. Tillerson sat down with our own Rich Edson. He's traveling with the Secretary of State in Latin America, joining us now from Bogota. Hello, Rich.
Good afternoon, Shep. And Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says Russia's fingerprints are all over election interference efforts here in Latin America, in Europe, and ahead of the midterm elections in the United States. And he says there are substantial challenges in preventing it. Is the U.S. better prepared this time around than 2016?
Well, I don't know that I would say we're better prepared, because the Russians will adapt as well. The point is, if it's their intention to interfere, they're going to find ways to do that, and we can take steps we can take. But this is something that once they decide they're going to do it, it's very difficult to preempt it.
Secretary Tillerson says he has a message from Russia. The United States knows you're trying to interfere. Stop it, or there will be consequences. The consequences for 2016 interference: the U.S. Congress passed increased sanctions against Russia, but the administration is still trying to implement those sanctions. The Kremlin has denied any election interference abroad. The Secretary of State, despite those interference attempts, the Russia's backing of the Assad regime in Syria, and interference in eastern Ukraine and the fighting there, he says he still wants to try to work with the Russians and find common ground between the United States and Russia. The Secretary of State is on his way back to the United States now after about a week in Latin America. The State Department says he's been working on security and economic relationships down here, on the economy front, particularly countering China's growing influence in this region. Shep, back to you.
Rich Edson live with us from Colombia. Rich, thanks so much. Let's turn to Desmond Butler now, an investigative reporter for the Associated Press, who's live with us today in studio. Nice to have you.
It's nice to be here.
How serious is this?
Look, there's a lot of evidence that the Russian government is targeting U.S. elections. There's extensive espionage going on.
No one's pushing back on this, not state, not defense, not anybody, right?
It's hard to say, but
I haven't heard anybody push back on it.
I haven't seen a lot of evidence.
Is there activity to prevent it that we know about?
I think people are trying, but this is a very, as I said, extensive effort, and Russia is very good at it.
Like, what are they doing? Any specifics?
What is the U.S. government doing?
What are the Russians doing?
The Russians, look, they are
a little bit of everything.
They are doing a lot of hacking. The group that we looked at, was responsible for hacking a lot of the members of Hillary Clinton's campaign.
I was going to get to that next. In fact, that same group of hackers that hacked back in 2016 also tried to steal U.S. military secrets. That's according to the Associated Press. In his article, it reports that the Russian hackers group called Fancy Bear, which we reported on extensively on the heels of Associated Press, quoting them, include Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, and the staffers are working on classified high-tech projects for the Pentagon, including drones and stealth fighters. So they got to not the employees, but the ones who contract out. And the AP reports that the hackers tricked those workers into clicking on links that could eventually expose their computer files and possibly lead to blackmail. But we really don't know what they got, right?
No, that's true. We know that a number of the people that they were targeting clicked on the links that could have exposed them. I should emphasize this is their personal email accounts, but a lot of people use the same passwords for their serious ones. You can find compromising material on somebody. The Russians are very good at blackmail, so this is serious.
So what the Russians always want to do is come up with compromise. So they'd go through everything they can get to of yours, and they'd either use your passwords to get into another place, or they might come to you and say, "Good afternoon. I know the following that your wife doesn't want to know, and as a result, you're going to tell me whatever it is." And we don't know what's happened.
There's a long history of that.
Well, sure, it's not a new thing, but this particular incident, we don't know all the ramifications from it, or that's from the story that I read that you wrote.
No, and in part because we don't know that anybody really investigated it.
There's not a big push in Washington, which has been really surprising. I've heard this attack compared to a physical military attack on the country. It was just that serious from an enemy of the state. And yet there's no big push out of Washington. Or is there something that I've missed?
You know, which military attacks have compromised our democracy as much as what happened during the last election?
But you don't hear about it. You don't hear the fight back against it. You don't hear warnings about how you could become unwittingly a target.
Well, I mean, I think part of that is partisan politics, and that what happened during the election has been thrown into a situation where people don't want to talk about it in the way that it's actually happening.
It's the first time that a lot of historians can remember ever that we've been attacked in such a way that we just pretend it didn't happen or something.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of elements of the government that are working on this. Whether or not our countermeasures are as effective as the Russian measures, that's another question.
That is another question. Desmond Butler from Associated Press, investigative reporter. Good story out today. It's on the AP app, and there's a link from our site. Thank you.
Thank you, Shep.
The White House says the Democratic memo on the Russia investigation is not as clean as the Republican version was, and officials might just need to make some changes in it before it can go public. Republicans say that the Democrats did that intentionally, but Justice Department officials say they reviewed the document and didn't make any changes. And Democrats say any redaction could mean White House is, well, dragging its feet. These ones say and those ones say, and look over here, look over here, look over here. We'll be right back.